here is a diagram. It's a bit complex, but actually I'm going to go fast. And you can see on the right there's a list of logos of nice cloud native foundation projects. This is one example, just to show what technology, what solution you can use. But obviously there are other alternatives for each of those. So we can find again our application in the middle now, consuming events. Potentially streaming events from Kafka. And the question we need to ask is, what do we need to measure on this application? So we need to have metrics from the app itself. Potentially it's an app package written in Java, in Scala, in Python. So we need to expose metrics for the performance and health of this app. We need, and that's back to your question earlier about the position in the queue. We need to also keep an eye on the consumer offset. So how much did we already read from the queue? Where are we positioned? What's our consumer offset? And to do that, here I mentioned just one example of a solution. It's a small open source project called Kafka Minion. We can see it's in light blue, meaning we deploy it on Kubernetes, just like the rest of our infra, and the rest of our services and tools. And then basically to expose the metrics and the performance of our infrastructure, Kafka itself, the backend for the streaming platform. We also going to use the same solutions as for the application and for Kafka Minion. We're going to use some Prometheus exporters. So here we can see on the diagram that we are using pretty much the same solution everywhere. It's all streaming to Prometheus infrastructure, also deployed on Kubernetes. Prometheus will parse, so those metrics, a lot of those metrics are coming and you only need a few of them. So we need to set up some rules to parse those metrics and pass it further up for consumption by the end users, potentially with something like Grafana. Now, at the bottom of the diagram, we can see two files. We can see a manifest, which is basically the way we're going to let our engineers write a very basic skeleton, potentially in YAML or in JSON, skeleton of what their app and the configuration of their app should be, so the desired state really. And we have an extra layer of CI/CD, which will basically template all of that and push the desired state to Kubernetes in our case. In the same manner, basically, we use also some YAML configuration to deploy and to configure Prometheus, for example. I just mentioned we need to parse those metrics in a specific way. We need to configure those parsers, those rules. And we also want to follow, just like with the manifest, the GitOps approach, where all of the changes are auditable. We push that to the CI/CD and then it deploys. For that, we could use something like Flux, for example. So here, the real idea is to really simplify and standardize some templates for engineers to just reuse to guarantee that as soon as they deploy their application, they get all the metrics they need to measure their performance, the performance of the backend they use. On the right-hand side, we can see an example of the Kafka Minion tool I mentioned. So that's something available for any of our engineers to manage the consumer offset, to actually follow their application and see how is it lagging. Is it basically a bit too far in the queue, which could show a problem in performance, for example.
Oh, and if I can stop you here really quickly, Jeremy, we got a question from someone in the audience. Can we take metrics based on the message content? For example, how many messages of each version do we have?
So that's a good, that's a good question, because the small Prometheus icon next to the stream app, I think that really shows and correct me if I'm wrong, Francesco, but you could really implement whatever metrics exposure you want in your application, in Java using Micrometer or something like that. Maybe using interceptors, I don't know. You could write something that does that. Is it performant? Is it a good idea to do that within your application? I'm not entirely sure, but yeah, I would say you can expose whatever counts, whatever counter you want from within the app. Francesco, can you think of examples where we've been writing very custom custom counters.
In the past, we had an example of a streaming application that was just optimized to count different versions of a specific schema, but it was more like a test or something to try something out. In my mind, I don't have a real example where I have done something like that. But one suggestion is if you implement a custom counter for your streaming application, for example, talking about, let's say what you're asking, you want to count different how many messages you have seen for each specific version of your schema, and you're using, for example, Kafka Stream. Think about that. You have the notion of committing the offset that we mentioned before. So if you haven't committed that offset, every message for which you haven't committed offset can be potentially read multiple times. Of course, talking about Kafka, you can enable exactly once, and you can prevent this thing. But when you're streaming data, think about possible situation where a redeploy or a restart or a temporary issue with something could trigger something that will force you to read again that message. Therefore, your metric could be a bit off.